This is Distant Replay.
Well, on this episode of Distant Replay, it's documentary recap time. We are sticking to 30 for 30s. We'll probably do a lot of these because they were so good through the years. But the Two Escobars from 2010, this is one of the first ones that came out. I think 30 for 30 launched in 2009. But this is one of the early ones, and one that I think grabbed a lot of attention when it first debuted, and I think a lot of people were talking about it early on, and that's what we're going to watch tonight and talk about here on Distant Replay. Mike, I was trying to think about this because when you mentioned this one to me, I was like, I think I've definitely seen this, but as I watched it, I don't know if I just didn't pay attention as much because I'll be honest, when there's subtitles, I'll kind of be in and out, right? If I'm not paying full attention, it's easy to miss a lot of stuff with subtitles. So I don't know if I didn't see it or just didn't pay close attention, but a lot of this was new information to me.
You know, Pablo Escobar is a figure where there is a million documentaries on him. If you bring up Netflix, you can find a documentary on every aspect of Pablo Escobar's life you want. But this gave a unique vantage point of him and the world of soccer that I don't think many people were aware of before this documentary came out, and was a very unique approach to take that the directors did, and I thought they did a great job with it.
Yeah, they did do a great job with it, and we're going to go through it tonight. It was the Zimbalist brothers, Jeff and Michael, were the directors. And so they take a look at this story, and it's very interesting because, you know, when I think back to the World Cup, and, you know, there's a lot of Americans that are soccer fans every 4 years, right, for the World Cup, and you probably have memories of watching these games, but you don't pay a whole lot of attention in between, and especially not to other countries when you're, you know, when these games are played. And I don't think many people understood exactly what was happening. At least, I might be wrong, but that's the way I feel about it. And thinking back on that moment, is I don't know how many people actually realized what Colombia was going through in 1994 when the World Cup was played in America, when the U.S. beat Colombia on an own goal. I think a lot of people remember that, and the jerseys the U.S. was wearing in those. But I don't think a lot of people know what was going on under the surface. And now I kind of feel bad, honestly, after watching this documentary, because like I kind of joke about it and the own goal, and like even whatever happened afterwards is kind of like I won't say a punchline, but it gets kind of just people are very flippant about it when they talk about it. It's not a big deal, right? It's kind of joking. It's halfway across the world. Like, we're not really worried about it. It is what it is. But when you hear the story, it's just so deep. All like everything that was happening in that country, man. It makes you really appreciate what you have, but I just think you can't overlook what they were going through at that point.
Yeah, I mean, the weight that these players had on their shoulders entering this World Cup, and specifically entering that game versus the Americans after losing to Romania in surprise fashion in game number one for them, was crazy enough.
Yeah.
Never mind, the own goal happens, and literally everyone's afraid for Andrés Escobar. Like that his life's in danger because he kicked an own goal in the World Cup. Those are the kind of stakes we're talking about. Now, what we're going to talk about the rest of this documentary is about is sort of leading up to that and why the country and the team were in that situation where, you know, there's this much pressure on the team and on a guy like Andrés Escobar. But it's something as like American sports fans and American athletes that, to be honest, I don't think we can identify with.
Nah, no way. So we'll do that tonight. We'll go through this entire documentary, give some thoughts on it. You can find us online, distantreplaypodcast.com. You can also catch us on Twitter, Instagram, and also YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, please hit subscribe, like the video, leave a comment. We always do our best to reply to those as well. So this documentary starts giving you that little taste of the 94 World Cup, because I think that's obviously what everybody goes into this thinking, okay, especially being a sports documentary or under a sports documentary umbrella like 30 for 30 is. It's kind of expect to hear a lot about soccer and about this game and about, you know, the Escobar involved, Andrés Escobar in this game. But it's just a little, very small piece of everything that's going on. It kind of intertwines with the drugs and the politics and everything else. So you get a little flash of that, and then we flash back to how everything kind of came to be, how we got to 1994, I think over the course of almost 30 years. So everybody knows about Pablo Escobar. Right, Mike? I mean, he's so well known. But I don't think many people understand the connection between him and soccer.
I don't think anyone understands the connection between him and soccer. And before this documentary, I don't think anyone had any clue. Unless you were there in the moment, like we hear from some of those people in this documentary, I don't know how you could possibly know, because it's not something that was ever on my radar, or I don't think most people's radar, that he was really into. Just a huge fan of the sport, a huge fan of the players. And as this documentary gets into in the beginning, was the owner of a Colombian club team named Atlético Nacional, or AC, Atlético Nacional, owned by Pablo Escobar. He basically, he likes soccer and everything, but his main purpose for owning the team was to launder his money, right? Because at this point, it's important to remember, we're in the era of Pablo Escobar here. He's worth like $3 billion, making like $50 million like a week. And not only Pablo Escobar, but different drug lords own different teams in this Colombian soccer league. And what that leads to is a bunch of, alpha personalities now not only competing in the drug trade, but now competing on the soccer field through their club teams.
Yeah. So essentially, like, Colombia was not a soccer country. I mean, they played it. They were probably passionate about it, but they couldn't keep guys in the country to play for their club teams because other countries were playing so much more money, right? South America and beyond in Europe. But when these guys got involved, like Escobar and the other drug money, they were able to put those dollars into players, both to help launder their money, but also because they were competitive and they wanted to beat out the other guys that were involved with other cartels or whoever else through soccer. Now, I didn't realize that, so I didn't realize that he helped kind of build the level of soccer played in that country. But when they start showing the videos, two things. When they start showing the videos of Escobar just kind of hanging out with friends, when he has especially the biker gang through the woods. I don't know who's shooting that film of him.
Those are always the video, dude. That clip of him on those bikes with his buddies kind of going through the woods is like the funniest thing and the most terrifying thing, I think, like you see on documentaries. Those guys, what they're capable of, but they look like they're having their time of their life on these bikes. And it's always the scene they show when they're describing how rich Pablo Escobar was.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I don't know what that footage is from. That's what always blows my mind. It's like, where they tracked that down. Who took that footage? It had to be one of his boys that took the footage. But I don't know how they got it, but it was crazy. So not only that, so that video and then the ones of the games when these teams were clashing and they got really good. I was amazed at how, I mean, you see the passion and you see a lot of the fans going crazy at soccer games, but the level of violence, like everywhere, both on the field, off the field, and in the country at this time, like you said, it's not anything we can actually relate to at all.
No, it's not. When Ben's talking to the degree of violence, I'll give you an example here. Nacional lost to America de Cali, who was run by people who ran the Cali drug cartel, right? And Escobar has the ref killed for bad calls that he made. You know what I mean?
By the way, one of the greatest lines of the whole documentary was...
What's that?
Was, no, Pablo Escobar would not have killed a referee over a soccer game. He would have killed anybody over a soccer game. Yeah, I was like, dang.
Yeah, dude, that is a chilling line. Basically, the America de Cali owner was in this documentary too, and he basically said, "Look, we weren't willing to go that far to win a soccer game or to win a soccer league, but Pablo Escobar was, And what that leads to is Nacional winning the Colombian league and going to the Copa America tournament, which is basically like the UEFA Champions League for South America, essentially. And they go through how Nacional wins. One of their best players is Andrés Escobar, who grew up in Medellin, a standout soccer player his whole youth. One of these players, like Ben was just talking about, where now he's staying to play club soccer in Colombia as opposed to going to Europe, right? Him and his teammates, they're at the ranch partying with Pablo Escobar. They're fully aware of who the team's owners are. He's really respected by the players, and he considers them friends, and they consider him friends. Because one thing that's sort of the linchpin to all this with soccer is Pablo Escobar built fields around the country for all the poor youth. So in the poor neighborhoods, he would go in there and, as a part of reviving the neighborhood, would build a soccer field. So kids had something to do, to be occupied with, and to grow as players. And a lot of the players who ended up being the best in the country played on those fields. So they always revered him for that. and that's how his relationships with the soccer players started to develop.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating when you hear about Escobar, Andres, and learn about who he is, because he's like the exact opposite of Pablo. I mean, they shared the name in common, but that was it. I mean, this is a guy that was raised to go to mass like every day before school. He reads his Bible pretty consistently. Just a family guy, good kid, and is uncomfortable in a lot of these situations, quite frankly, and but goes along with it because he's playing soccer, and he's it's just kind of. It's part of his career and his path, to somewhere else eventually. But he's so good. I mean, he is legitimately a kind of a budding superstar in the world, right? Not just locally in Colombia, but he's able to stay around because of Pablo and whatnot. But when they showed that game between Nacional and Olympia from Paraguay, which was the championship, right, of that Copa de America, that game. Like, I almost want us to go find that game for the podcast because it seemed legendary. Not only with the fans and the atmosphere and everything, but Nacional gets down 2-0, comes back and scores like 2 late goals. Then they go to the penalty kicks. Andres is the first guy to kick, scores, right? And they talked about how he was like the youngest guy on the team. Like, you don't send out the youngest kid first. He scores. And then it's just like back and forth. Nobody can score until I think like the 8th kick. Like like an epic shootout on top of this game that was played, and then they finally get one to punch it through. That game looked incredible to me.
Ben, through our previous jobs that we both had together, we watched a lot of soccer, all right? Mm-hmm. I never remember any shootout rivaling what we saw in this video here of this game you're talking about. Very good point bringing it up. Like, it gets lost in the shuffle here because there's so much going on in this documentary. The environment in that game was crazy. How it ended was even more crazy. And we're talking about the kind of game, guys, where there's streamers on the field.
Oh, yeah.
People are throwing things on the field, not anything dangerous, just like, celebrating or whatever. And the crowd's going crazy. It's like a dimly lit field because you're in Paraguay somewhere and, the lights aren't that great. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it's just a crazy scene there, and capped off by this penalty shot round. And what about that goalie for Nacional, though? I mean, talk about standing on your head. And then you talked about Escobar before, Andrés Escobar, and best way to describe him, Ben, is we find out later he would become the captain of the national team, the Colombian national team. He pretty much lived his life like a captain. You know what I mean? Like, just very steady, very consistent, very respectful. And it made total sense to me when they said, he would become, the captain of the national team. I was like, that makes sense. The guy lived his whole life for that moment,
Mm-hmm. So the first kind of, I guess this is a longer doc, but the first third of it is about the rise of soccer in Colombia, and it's the footage and the video and just everything you see is. That in and of itself is worth watching because it's so eye-opening. Just, I mean, the stuff that you can never comprehend that was going on the field. And this kind of goes, we're kind of backpedaling here a little bit, but just everything with like fans taking the field and like players kicking referees and, violence outside of the stadiums. It just seemed like there were literally like no rules, it felt like. And I don't know, and still like thousands and thousands of fans would show up. And with this threat of violence kind of just looming over everything.
Yeah, it's just crazy. It was almost like, the infusion of this Colombian drug cartel money, like, emboldened everyone. Owners, fans, players. And it just led to, like, an electric time period for this soccer league that it sounds like before and since, like, never reached anything even close to this.
Yeah, so at the same time in America, you had Len Bias, which we talked about in a previous documentary, thanks to a 30 for 30 on Len Bias, about how the U.S. started taking things seriously, really seriously in the drug world after Len Bias's death. So this all kind of plays out the same time frame in the 80s. And so now the U.S. is looking towards Pablo Escobar and his group because of the drugs that are coming into the U.S. that are now killing Americans. So in one of like the wildest moves, Escobar decides he's going to run for the House of Representatives because he can't get extradited if he's part of the government, which is just like the fact that you can have a guy of that stature running a drug cartel just be like, you know what? I'm just going to go run for the House of Representatives and probably win it. And then what are they going to do? They can't touch me. And he does. And he goes and gets it. But the reason why he wins that spot, and Escobar, if you've ever heard anything about him or watched anything or read anything, you're kind of aware of this, but he's a guy that was both loved and feared, right? He was loved by a large percentage of that population because he did give back and did kind of look out for the poor people in the country. You know, whether or not you want to justify his other actions and maybe say, okay, well, some of that's worth it because of all the people he helped along the way, you know, that's up to you to kind of debate internally. But the fact was, he did have a lot of people on his side, so much so that he could win a popular vote.
Yeah, it's a very good way to do it. He did win. It's a very good way to put it. And he gets those four years of immunity, like diplomatic immunity, to avoid extradition to the U.S. And now he's going to use those 4 years to sort of create a climate in Colombia where he scares everyone, including politicians, to re-vote on that amendment they made to the Constitution to have the extradition treaty with the U.S. So that's his other big goal here that I think is important to mention. And during this time, like Ben said, the poor people love him, the rich people hate him. Because the poor people, he gives them opportunity in their eyes, and the rich people, he's shaking them down because if they don't comply with him, he'll kill them, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, we're talking about he killed 2 of his political rivals. He coordinated bombings of planes, government buildings, etc. And this was all a coordinated plan to stop anyone who supported extradition.
Yeah.
So from the inside out, he was going to, during those 4 years where he had immunity, do his best to get that law completely wiped from the books.
So all this is going on, too, with Pablo and the country and everything. The soccer team's, like, really good all of a sudden. Like, Colombia has risen to a team that's okay to one of the top teams in the world, and they're beating everybody along the way, Mike. I think they lost like one game, and they show highlights and they run down the scores. You know, they're beating Argentina, they're beating Brazil. I mean, they're running through just about everybody right now. So you have the kind of the rise of this team, which is led by Andrés Escobar while all this is going on. But that's kind of in the background, and it's a big deal because it is kind of bringing the country together while everything's happening and so much destruction is happening back home and everybody's split. I mean, there's a lot of people that love Escobar, but obviously because of what he is and who he is and what he does, there's a lot of people that hate him, right? And they want to finish his cartel and get him out of there, get him arrested, get whatever, put him behind bars so that he can't continue to murder and kill and supply drugs all over the country. So you kind of see that, but the country finally decides to take a stand, and that's kind of the turning point of everything. Right. The country said, listen, this is enough. Like, people are getting murdered that are, as you mentioned, like political foes. And we have to do something about this. Like these are all hitting very close to home at this point, and nobody's safe. But there ends up forming a group called, and did they actually pronounce the name of this, Mike? P-E-P-E?
I think it was the Pepes.
They did say the Pepes. Okay.
The Pepes. Yeah,
okay.
Pepes.
So these are like, what was it the people persecuted by Pablo Escobar?
Yeah. So it was basically like a vigilante group put together to take down Pablo Escobar. Because remember, they have to go to this extreme to take down Pablo Escobar because he does get the extradition part of the Constitution removed, right? So what he does is essentially through fear, he gets politicians to repeal the extradition part of the Constitution, which is really their only viable way to get him extradited and to stop him. That's the only weapon they had, quote unquote weapon, against him and other drug dealers was this extradition treaty. Well, now that's gone. So now this vigilante group sort of bonds together to try to take him down. Now, the government didn't officially sanction this Los Pepes, but they didn't exactly try to stop it either.
Yeah.
So now the violence escalates tenfold because now we have an all-out war between Escobar's Medellin cartel and literally everyone else.
Right. And to point out, these guys did a really good job of getting some really good interviews. Like guys that were in the trenches with Pablo, like his first cousin that was there doing everything and admitted to murdering people or whatever. Another guy that was behind bars that was like closely associated with him. So we're getting really good information and firsthand accounts of everything that went down. And as this one guy points out, I think his cousin, he said, listen, Like all the bombing and the destruction was happening in the country wasn't because of Escobar. It was Pepe's group, right? That was kind of continuing to like attack civilians and attack, kind of destroy the country with under the guise of, hey, this is Pablo Escobar, this kind of bringing this country down and kind of helping support their movement. But it was them behind everything. And ultimately they do get to him and they murder him. They kill him. And again, we get footage of like most of the stuff too, man, which is
wild.
It's crazy.
Like dead bodies, like the camera kept rolling in Colombia when there was murders. Like you saw any murder they mentioned and highlighted in this, like you saw the body of the person who got killed.
Pretty much, including Escobar. We see him.
Both Escobars.
Yeah, and we see Pablo in multiple scenes as his dead body, which is just crazy in and of itself. But that that kind of changes everything though. When he's killed, the country kind of changes because there are no rules anymore. And they point out, like the people on Escobar's side, they point out, like him or not, he had rules and there was order under his reign. And after this is kind of a free for all. New kind of leaders trying to establish themselves, right? Make their points. And I don't know how bad it was, Mike, because you see a lot of videos of other countries. You even see it here in America, right? When things are really bad in certain spots, you see the worst of it. But if you're actually living around there, you're like, I mean, yeah, there's stuff going on, but I still go to work and whatever else. I just got the sense, like watching this footage, like it just did not seem like you'd want to be out on the streets like after dark.
Yeah, and to give you an example of sort of the lawlessness that took place after. Now, we're not saying Pablo Escobar was a great guy, right? But he ran the criminal underworld like with a set of rules. You know what I mean? And one of his biggest rules was no kidnapping.
Yeah.
Now, after he's gone, kidnapping is rampant. There's a guy, one of the players on the Colombian national team, right? Ben, I don't know what you thought of this, but the same guy had his son kidnapped before the World Cup, and his brother got killed right after they lost to Romania.
His 3-year-old son.
His 3-year-old son got kidnapped and returned, by the way, just to clarify that. And his brother got killed after they lost to Romania. Both of which, again, associates of Escobar say, like, Pablo Escobar, he barred kidnapping of kids, and like he would never kill someone over a soccer game.
Yeah.
Over a sporting event. Those are two things that started to sort of materialize very shortly after his death.
Yeah. Quickly, very quickly. So we this kind of brings us to the World Cup now. So all this is in the backdrop, right? Country is going crazy. There's lawlessness kind of everywhere right now. There's no order. A lot of violence is taking place, and now Colombia's leaving to go compete in the World Cup. Now, this same time too, Andrés, he's in a really good spot personally. He's got a fiance. They're talking about start raising a family, beginning a family. And now, not only that, he's got offers to play in Europe, including from AC Milan, one of the top clubs in the world. And the first ever Colombian to get an offer to come play over at Milan. So this is a huge deal. And he's looking forward to this. He's even talking about World Cup's done, the next season. They're talking about going to Italy, all this stuff. So his future is bright at this point. So they head off to the World Cup, but in the back of their mind, as you mentioned, like there's a lot of pressure from this dark element that you better perform or else. I mean, quite simply. So they leave. I mean, this is a team that had been very, literally ranked 4th in FIFA rankings. So they're like a favorite going into this World Cup in America. And as you mentioned, they go out and they're playing. They obviously aren't playing loose. They lose to Romania, and it seemed like kind of a flukish thing too, right? I mean, they're playing pretty well, but Romania gets a couple goals, although maybe they've been outplayed. One of those types of games. But as you talked about, after this happens, a player's brother gets murdered, like literally right after this, kind of making a point. And they're thousands of miles away, and this is happening. How in the world do you even continue to play? I can't think of the pressure that's on these guys that really, I mean, they're just talented athletes, and they ended up in a position where their families' lives are in danger based on their performance for no reason other than this criminal underbelly. That's how they feel. That's what they want to do.
Now, if you're wondering the impact this Los Pepes group had, after sort of they came into power of the underworld, Ben's hitting on some of it, and I'm going to hit on a little bit more here. They had police at the homes of the players' families during the game. The coach was told to not play a certain player in one of the games. Otherwise, everyone on the team would be killed when they came back to Colombia. So they literally sat out one of their key players because they were intimidated by that. It's just complete chaos. And you would think that the country would be a little bit more proud of this team, because we're not talking about a country with a really storied national team tradition. This is only up to this point in '94. This is the third time they were ever in the World Cup. Colombia has only been in 6 World Cups total in their country's history. So we're talking about like an unprecedented team, 4th in the rankings heading into the tournament. And now they're dealing with this after the one loss where, a lot of these criminals had a lot of money on the game gambling wise. And this is what's leading to all of the, the threatened and the carried out violence on soccer players and their families. And now in the prep for this game against the U.S., there's all this going on in the backdrop and all that riding on this game versus the U.S. because they already lost one game in pool play. And if they lose this game, it's effectively over.
So you basically overlooked one of the craziest details of this few days in the U.S. So the guys go back to the hotel room, and I forgot if it was after practice or they were I forgot what happened, but they were like, let's go back to the room, settle in, whatever, like a day or two before the U.S. game. And they said that on their TVs in their hotel room were death threats. Like they made it sound somehow these guys were able to feed something into their rooms with death threats on it. To me, that just was like one of the biggest jaw droppers of the entire documentary. We're in America right now, Mike. You know what I mean? Like this is being competed in the U.S. It's not like this is happening in some small country in Eastern Europe or some small South American country. These are guys that are staying in a hotel in the U.S., and their story was that these death threats are coming through. The ones that you mentioned where, hey, if you play this guy, there's big problems, and they didn't play him. He retired because he's like, I can't do this if this is how this is going to unfold.
Yeah, the dude literally retired
in the middle of the World Cup.
In the middle of the World Cup, when your team just won 26 of 20, or only lost one game out of 26 in qualifying, and great point bringing this up because that's something I neglected to mention. If they can get to these guys sitting in a United States hotel room, imagine how easy they can get to them in Colombia.
Unbelievable. So they had this all hanging over him going into the U.S. game. And I'm just I'm watching the national anthems, which is a great spectacle, an awesome lead in to a huge game. And I can't imagine what's going through these guys' minds, man. I mean, with all this happening, literally one of their teammates' brother was killed because of their performance. They had a guy retire because what was going to happen if he played.
And we didn't even mention their goalie, their starting goalie, did not even make the trip to the World Cup because he was in jail for associating with Pablo Escobar.
Yeah.
We didn't even mention that.
Yeah.
That's this whole backdrop heading into this game versus the U.S.
All of it doesn't seem real, right? When you talk about it, it seems like, how could this actually happen? How could this happen to any sports team? Because, I mean, look, if our big scandals here, are, who blew up on Twitter, or what did First Take say about so and so, stupid stuff, right? We're talking about these dudes were legitimately concerned about being murdered or their family being murdered, depending on how they play. Which, when you think about it, it's like, how stupid are you to put pressure on these guys if you're expecting them to perform? Even if I don't know how much gambling had to play into it versus they were just in control and could kind of do what they wanted to. But, I mean, what kind of results do you expect to get when these guys can't even play with a clear head? And they couldn't. In that U.S. game, they probably outplayed the U.S. too the entire way. Just, kind of fluky stuff. Couldn't finish, couldn't get the job done. And then that one pass that gets kicked in by, of all players, their best player on the team, the captain, the guy that's kind of the star of the country, who, seems to be one of the few people you can actually pull for and in this era of Colombia, right? He's kind of risen above everything. He's the one that does this. And now when you watch that goal and you see his reaction, you see the goalie's reaction, man, it's hard to watch, honestly.
It's hard to watch because you know what happened afterwards. And for me, the most chilling part of the documentary was after Andrés Escobar kicked the own goal, right? The only one of his career, by the way. But after he kicked the own goal, his nephew, Escobar's nephew, turns to his mother, so Escobar's sister, and says, "They're going to kill Andrés." Like, this little kid has the presence of mind to know that his uncle just kicked an own goal, and that's going to cause like drug cartel affiliated people to kill him. Could you imagine being a young kid and living in an environment where that's even on your mind?
No, I couldn't. Could not.
That was jarring, you know? And so now, June 22nd is this game against the U.S., okay? By the beginning of July, he's back in Colombia.
Yep. They return home. Obviously, there's a lot of fear. Coach, who's on this documentary, basically tells him, look, just kind of lay low, right? Just stay home. But he's a guy that's like, listen, I got to get out, show my face. It was a mistake, but I want to be among the people. And he goes out. And I'm still like, I get you want to go out and show your face, but do you really need to, like, why are you out all night? Like, bad things already happen at that time of night, or just, out of nightclubs. Like, I can see you going out for a meal at a restaurant, but you really kind of elevate that chance of danger staying out late, and goes to a club. Again, we got footage of this too, which is, I don't know if it was like a security camera, but still wild that we have a view of this kind of unfold. But he gets in an argument. Obviously somebody yells at him in a nightclub about scoring that goal against the U.S. and, it's obviously disrespectful. So they have words. It kind of spills outside at some point, and he's kind of on his way out. And those guys kind of call him out again in the parking lot, and he pulls up next to him to kind of address what was being said. And basically just, not even necessarily disrespectful, but just talking back to these people who we find out are the Gallon brothers that are, another drug cartel here, right? That's kind of on the scene. And the way it's described by one of Pablo Escobar's guys, is that basically it wasn't a drug, like a gambling related thing that these guys were pissed about. They were pissed that he had the nerve to respond to them when they were calling him out. Like, that's the kind of gall they had, and like the freedom they had to do what they wanted to at this time, that the fact that he just spoke back to them pissed them off enough to just shoot him 6 times in the car.
Yeah, and these guys, these Gallon brothers, are a part of that Los Pepes, vigilante group. So these guys just took down Pablo Escobar. They're partying in Medellin, by the way, which we should mention. That's where he went back to, where he was from, the center of all this violence and killing and everything. And now they have Andrés Escobar in front of them, the biggest, at that time, biggest GOAT in the country for what he did in that game. He answers them back, and they kill him, That's the kind of... That's how cavalier these guys were at this time. That's how, they thought they were untouchable, because, hey, look, if the government's basically sanctioning you to go around and do what you need to do to take care of Pablo Escobar, you probably think like you're just untouchable, and in a lot of cases these guys were.
And the worst part about this, I thought about this because we do a lot of true crime podcasts here, and when this whole like kind of trial unfolded, they arrest the Gallon brothers, and they basically went to a guy and paid him off to kind of get them out of trouble. And everyone's like, it's clear these guys are behind it. They're the ones that killed Escobar, but they put everything on the bodyguard, and he took the fall, and it was solely on him. Those guys got off basically unscathed. And not only that, this guy gets a 43-year sentence for cold-blooded murder.
Yep.
That's it. And then he was released after 11 years.
Released after 11 years. They had the clown judge on this document. Why that guy would agree to be on the documentary, I have no idea.
What does he have to gain?
Yeah, the judge who oversaw the trial and who, sentenced this guy to the 43 years, kind of knowing it was kind of like a joke kind of sentence, and knowing he wasn't probably really responsible. And if he was the one who pulled the trigger, he did it at the order of these Gallon brothers. Like, that was pretty clear. And man, this just kind of the killing of Andrés Escobar and the killing of Pablo Escobar, less than 1 year apart from each other. Basically the same people who killed Pablo killed Andrés, and that, they make it clear that Andrés would have never been killed if Pablo was alive. Because again, Pablo had rules. Now, again, I'm not saying he was a saint, and I'm not saying he did everything the way he was supposed to do things. He never did anything wrong. But as far as the criminal underworld in Colombia is concerned, and the safety of people, there's people, his associates, stand by the fact that the government going after him made the country a lot worse in the long run. And one thing that's not disputable is the drug money leaving Colombian soccer caused it to pretty much fall apart.
Oh yeah, it's astounding. Yeah, there was really nothing left soccer wise beyond that. But it's a remarkable story because these two Escobars were just so different. Andres wasn't comfortable going out to Pablo's house, even though he was kind of funding the team and everything. But their whole life was connected by this group, the Pepes. Like after everything was said and done, it's crazy. It's a heartbreaking story too. Here and kind of, he wrote a column in the newspaper about you must go on, life continues, and he was murdered. And it's the entire documentary was well done. You hear from everybody involved. The story itself, if you haven't heard it, if you don't know it, it's worth being aware of and being familiar with because it's so impactful and it makes you understand what's going on outside of your bubble, right? But the fact that like all this happened and then now Colombian soccer, and I'd forgotten that they were just basically bad from this point until this documentary aired in 2010, and they had not been back to the World Cup when this documentary aired. I guess it was probably 2009 when it officially was finished, but they have been pretty good since. They've had few guys coming up. Like I'm more interested now to kind of see how I'd love to see a documentary from like 2000 Colombia soccer to like now to kind of how they've kind of risen from the ashes again and how these players have been good. And I guess it was because like, these fields were built all across the country and kids still grow up and play soccer. So finally, I guess that element came through, but you see even the graphic at the end, the stats, Mike, where I don't remember what year exactly, but maybe the year Andres was killed, Colombia had the highest murder rate in the world. And then like a handful of years later, kind of when all this kind of settled down, like that number had been cut in half.
Yeah, that was a good stat. You're right. They showed it right at the very end. Pretty eye-popping for sure. And yeah, I mean, this documentary, like, it's the second one we've watched in a row here, where like the violence from a political standpoint overshadowed what should have been, a great sports story for the country. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We did the Once Brothers documentary with Vlade Divac and Drazen Petrovic on our last episode, and it reminded me a lot of that documentary in that respect. Like, this is a team, had everything going for it, was prepped to go on a serious run, in the World Cup, and then these other factors, I can't help but think, like, it kind of hampered their performance ultimately, and look, caused multiple people their lives, which is wild to think about.
To me, I know you said Once Brothers was maybe one of your favorite documentaries so far. I think this one was better in my mind.
Yeah, I may be coming around to that. I had honestly forgot how good this one is. How good this one was.
Yeah.
And I can't stress enough, if you're like a Pablo Escobar person and you consume all Pablo Escobar content that's on the internet, of which there's a lot, you may think like, oh, it's just another Pablo Escobar documentary, but it's not. Like they take a very, very unique spin on this and portray him in a light that I guarantee you haven't seen in any other documentary.
Yeah. The Two Escobars 2010 documentary released in August of 2010. This is part of ESPN's 30 for 30. I think the first season of that, but it goes way back. But it's remarkable. It's well worth the time. It's almost 2 hours. It's one of the longer ones we've done. That's why this episode's a little bit longer. But it's worth it. It's worth going through all of it and understanding. And I've got a different kind of view of that 94 World Cup. Got a different view of that Colombian team, right? I always thought about Carlos Valderrama and that big hair and like the flashiness of that team, but completely different viewpoint moving forward. And like, honestly, like maybe I sound a little soft, Mike, but like, I don't like, I never really joked about like that murder, like the player own goal getting killed. Never really joked about it, but I just never really took it that seriously. But now, like after watching this, understanding everything behind it, it's not something that's funny,
Very well said. Just very well said. I have nothing to add. That is very well said. And look, man, Valderrama, that guy's hair, like he was the story for that team. If you didn't follow the team, you're right. That's another good point. Valderrama, and in that game, you had Alexi Lalas with his hair. You had Tony Miola.
Oh, yeah. What a crew.
That's one of those games for U.S. soccer that is probably one of the most well-known games ever.
Yeah, I know. And when you think about it now, it's like they basically won that because they beat a team that was under the pressure of their family being murdered. It kind of takes away a little bit of the mystique of that victory.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's another good point.
All right, let's close it out, Mike. We've been going long enough, but a great documentary. Again, recommend it. You can find it on ESPN Plus if you have a subscription. Just look under 30 for 30. They're in the true crime section. You'll find the Two Escobars. We got to get out of here, Mike, but we encourage everyone to send us in any thoughts they have on this documentary or any recommendations for games, docs, or true crime.
Absolutely. Send those suggestions. Keep them coming. If you listen to us, you know we do listen to them and we do execute based on your suggestions. And until next time.